Hi everybody. My name is Jacob Firsel. I'm a licensed tour guide here in Israel. And for Voice of Faith Tours, I'd like to welcome you to Magdala. Now, Magdala, if that sounds familiar, it's because this is the hometown of a certain Mary, Mary Magdalene. So this is the hometown of Mary Magdalene, but it's a very, very important place. First of all, where are we? Well, just over to the east of us is the Sea of Galilee. We here call it Kinnert. And over to the west of us is a famous mountain called Mount Arbel, and down at the bottom of Mount Arbel is a valley called the Valley of the Doves. And the Valley of the Doves is important because there's a highway that goes to a town called Nazareth. So here we are in Galilee in northern Israel, in a place called the Magdala, and the name is telling. First of all, Magdala, Migdal in Hebrew means tower. But Magdala had another name, in Greek, Taricheae, place of salted fish. Now, place of salted fish, we'll talk about that a little later. But the important thing here about Magdala is that it is the biggest town in Galilee by far. Now we know that Jesus' ministry was a little bit less than 3 years. And it says in the Bible that he went through all the towns and villages, speaking the word, teaching. And Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease among the people. So, if Magdala was the biggest town in the area, in the ministry of Jesus, it makes sense that Jesus spent a good amount of his time teaching, working miracles here in Magdala. Now, another source we have, aside from the good book, is a Jewish historian by the name of Josephus Flavius. And Josephus Flavius is sort of the Jewish people's Benedict Arnold. He was a general fighting the Romans in the Revolt of 66 to 70 AD. And this town fell to the Romans in a bloody battle which happened in the sea, in which the Romans defeated the defenders, and the Sea of Galilee turned red from the blood of the defenders. Now, an interesting thing that we're reminded of the Jewish revolt is this wall right here. Now, this wall was built from stones and pillars taken from the synagogue behind us. And it was a defensive wall because we're now on the very, very eastern part of the city. And this is where the Jewish defenders in 69 AD defended the town from the Romans so long ago. How was Magdala, the synagogue, and the stone I'll talk about in just a moment, discovered? And the answer is the hotel next to us. Now, this modern hotel had to be moved from its original location because of the archaeological site here. At the very end of the year 2009, the archaeologists had to check off a box for the building permit to build the hotel. And the very last day of their survey, they discovered the wall of the synagogue. And as they started digging, by the way, the synagogue, when it was discovered, was the only first century synagogue discovered in the land of Israel from the time of Jesus. That's a big deal. So as they started digging down, they found this stone. And this stone is truly unique. So when this stone was discovered, the first thing they saw was the menorah, this candlestick holder on a base with what looks like two jars next to it, two columns, and some sort of arch over it. Now, that menorah is very important because the menorah illuminated the temple in Jerusalem. And the two columns on the side were there at the entrance of the Holy of Holies. The jars either held water or possibly oil, olive oil, that the candelabra was burning. Now, it gets more interesting as we look at the top of the stone. And at the top of the stone, what we see in the center is a rosette, a flower pattern, and what look like hearts. But they're not hearts, I'll get to that in a moment. What look like two trees on the side and stands possibly burning something. Dr. Rena Talbor, who was a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, when this stone was discovered early 2010, came here and sat in front of the stone literally for hours. Her book was just recently published, and we now are pretty sure how we can decode the stone. So we see two trees, and of course we're reminded in the book of Genesis, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The heart-shaped designs, they're not hearts, but rather bread loaves that are arranged in a certain way, and that of course are the 12 loaves of bread at the table of the offering in the Temple of Jerusalem. These are probably incense stands on the side, and this rosette pattern we now believe was the curtain, this beautiful purple curtain with gold thread that covered the Holy of the Holies, and that was split in two on that Friday afternoon when Jesus is crucified at Golgotha. So, in my opinion, lets us know what's here is these arches. Now, I was here when this stone, a few days after it was discovered, I was here in 2010, and we now know, and I suggested that these were arches, and that is a vestibule, steps on the bottom, entrance to the temple. Now, the other side is exactly the same. The temple had an entrance called the Holy Gates, and it had an exit. But the most interesting thing, I think, is this. You can see on the side, on both sides of the stone, we see a lamp. Now, this lamp is very special. It's got this sort of, where the wick went in, you poured the oil in here, and you burnt the lamp. This type of lamp is very special to the land of Israel, and it's called a Herodian lamp. And all the Herodian lamps that have been found in the land of Israel come from Jerusalem. We know that because the clay, we actually can analyze the clay and tell where the clay comes from. Every lamp that has been found in all of the land of Israel comes from Jerusalem. So apparently when you went in Jerusalem, you got one of these lamps. And we're reminded of the proverb that the soul of a man is like a lamp unto the Lord. Now, if that wasn't enough, let's walk over here. At the front of the stone, we see two arches, in what looked like, when I first saw it, wheels. But underneath the wheels, it looks like an explosion. Well, here's the thing. The stone represents the temple in Jerusalem. The temple in Jerusalem literally is the house of God. Now in Judaism, God can have no material representation. He's formless. Except in the Bible, there's one place where we get a glimpse of the Almighty, and that is in the book of Kings. When the prophet Elijah ascends to heaven, he ascends to heaven in a chariot of fire. So, if this is indeed the chariot of fire, well, that really puts the icing on the cake, that this stone represents the temple. Now, if you look at the stone, it's slanted, and it has 4 legs. We believe, and by the way, the stone was found in the center of the synagogue. We'll go there in just a moment. There's another facsimile of the stone there, another copy, one-to-one copy of the stone. We believe that the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, which were read back then only on Saturdays, only on the Sabbath, was read from this stone. Okay, so let's walk into this first room, study hall, which is called a Beit Midrash in Hebrew, and why it's so important. When the site was first discovered, a coin was found here. Now, coins are an archaeologist's best friend because they tell us when, well, they can date the structure, they can date the site. The coin was minted in 28 AD. Now, that's very special. That's a very special year because most Christian scholars date the beginning of Jesus' ministry here in Galilee in 28 AD. So here we are in this room, this study room, the Beit Midrash. And if you'll notice that I'm sitting on a row of benches, and there's an inner row of benches, and there's an outer row of benches. Because synagogues, 2,000 years ago, were used for 2 things: for the study of the law and as sort of hostel or halfway houses for Jewish travelers. So if we take for granted that this was the largest town in Galilee, by the way, the population was between 8,000 and 10,000 people. When you compare it with Capernaum, with a population of maybe 1,800, that says something. So Jesus would have been here a lot of times because he's teaching the largest population. And the place he would be teaching would be in the study hall. Now, I want you to look at this stone here. And there's 2 grooves in the stone. And it's in the center, sort of the center of attention here. I put it to you that there was a little fold-out chair that was here, where the master, later we will call them rabbis, would be teaching the law and teaching their interpretation of the law. There are very few places that you can say with a great deal of certainty that where Jesus was. This is one of them. Guys, this stone is where Jesus was teaching. And I think right opposite him was probably Peter, because Peter was always the first one in the action, right? So this study hall is where Jesus taught. So this indeed is a very important place. Here is where Jesus taught. So right now I'd like us to go into the synagogue. All right. So you notice there's an entranceway here, and I'm going to go sit here in the synagogue. Okay, so here we are in the first century synagogue of Magdala. Now, synagogue, which literally means a place of gathering, itself wasn't holy. As like today, synagogues are not holy places. What is holy is the Torah. Now, the Torah scroll would have been read right here. But if we read carefully the Bible, and by the way, we're not really sure what the prayer service was 2,000 years ago, except we have a lot of clues in the book of Luke. I'll talk about that in a moment. So we have the stone here, and if the Torah scroll would have been put on the stone, the person reading it would have had to be sitting. But we know that the Torah was read standing. So probably there was some sort of wooden stand put on the stone. And you'll notice that everybody in the synagogue is facing the person reading the Torah, and he is facing this direction. He's facing south, and that, of course, is the direction of Jerusalem. Now, you can see that there are 3 rows of benches, and then we see these beautiful columns with the painted plaster on them. Okay, 4 columns. On the side of the synagogue, we see 2 rooms. One of the rooms, we believe, and it's the room with the 2 large stone blocks, was probably on top of that was a wooden cabinet, and inside the cabinet, the Torah scrolls were kept. So there were 6 readings from that portion of the Torah that week. The Torah was read on Sabbath, and there was a 3-year cycle to read the entire Torah, the 5 books of the Bible. Afterwards, whoever was the man of honor that Sabbath would read from the book of prophets. That's called the Haftorah. So Jesus, we know if we open up the book of Luke, it said, so when he came to Nazareth where he had been brought up, and as his custom was, he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. And he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." So this is a synagogue from that time. We see also a beautiful mosaic floor, which we now know was probably laid a little bit later at the time of Jesus. But the synagogue itself is from his time. So when you come here and you visit the synagogue at Magdala, as it is now, you can actually touch the place where the Lord sat, where the Lord was, and where the Lord taught. Okay, so let's talk about the town of Magdala. This is a street, and streets in the ancient world were dictated. What dictated the width of the street? Well, a loaded donkey could cross another loaded donkey in the street. That's what dictated the width of a street, or a loaded camel can walk by. And right next to the synagogue, we have this basin, made of basaltic rock, so its water doesn't seep through it like in limestone. And quite possibly, before you went in the synagogue or when you went out, you ritually washed your hands. Now, as we walk through the town, we see these pits dug in the ground, and we see a large aqueduct bringing fresh water to these pools. So the name of the town, Taricheae, the place of salted fish, water bringing, aqueducts bringing water to the pools. I believe in a simple explanation. This is where the fish were taken from the Sea of Galilee, placed in these pools of water, and then processed to be salted fish and to make a paste called garum. Now, garum was used, it was sort of like the ketchup of the Roman world, and it was made with fermented fish guts. Sounds great, doesn't it? But it was top dollar, or should I say top drachma back then, and the town became wealthy from its fishing industry. Okay, so as we continue our tour of the ancient town of Magdala, we walk through an industrial area where the fish were processed and salted, and we cross over one of the many aqueducts that brought water from the Sea of Galilee to the industrial area. And where we're walking now is to the better part of town. The people of the town lived obviously away from the area where the fish were processed. So what we're going now is to visit a villa. We're crossing to the right side of town, and again we see another ancient road of the town. So we're going to get on the actual level of the town right here. You can see a street in the ancient world wasn't very wide, and you'll notice the stones I'm stepping on. Below us is an aqueduct that's bringing water to a home here. But what really has our interest is what's here. This is an ancient ritual bath called a mikveh, and this tells us a lot about the people who lived here back then. Okay, so this is the wall of a very, very large house. I mean, it's large. Guys, it's 5,000 square feet. That's a pretty big house, even in our standards today. But back then, this was someone who was very, very wealthy. And they made sure that they had a stone-paved ritual bath, a mikveh, in their home. Now, who was most concerned about ritual purity were the priests, the Cohens. So this home was owned by a wealthy person who owned, I bet, not only part of the fishing industry, but the fantastic farmland in the area. Okay, so the area, the kibbutz next to us, is called Ginosar. Now, Ginosar is Hebrew, and that means the lands of the minister. Who that minister is, I'll talk about in a moment when we open up the good book. So this fantastic ritual bath, which is fed by water that's coming, groundwater that's seeping up, making it ritually clean, kosher, fit. So what does the good book tell us about Magdala? Remember, in the Bible, every word is important, and there's a reason it's there. Now, Mary of Magdalene is commonly perceived as a harlot. But if we read Gospel correctly and really kind of pay attention to what we're reading, possibly we have a different story. I'm reading Luke 8:1. Now it came to pass afterward that he went through every city and village, preaching and bringing the glad tidings of the kingdom of God, and the 12 were with him. And certain women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities, Mary called Magdalene, out of whom had come 7 demons, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others who provided for him from their substance. Now remember, Jesus and the Jesus movement, they survive by people giving them charity. So here in Luke 8, we have a list of donors. Now, those of you who have donated money to build a hospital or church or some other public building, usually it goes, the larger the donor, their name goes first. So it's interesting that Mary of Magdalene's name is first, and then a very important person. And her name, we see here, is Joanna, the wife of Chuza. Now Chuza, the steward of King Herod, he's sort of like the chief of staff, and he's an important guy. So remember, the name of this area, Ginosar, means the fields or the gardens or the property of the minister. I put it to you that that minister was Chuza. Mary Magdalene, rather than being a harlot, perhaps she was the owner of the house here. And she was a wealthy contributor to the Jesus movement, and an important one. Sometimes they even call her the 13th disciple. Here we are at the water's edge 2,000 years ago. Now this wall was uncovered about 9 years ago, and if you look to the other side, you'll see pebbles. You see the smooth pebbles that denotes that the water came up to this wall here, and then here we see an ancient highway, and then we see these walls here, and what this is the dry dock, so that the ships that plied the Sea of Galilee would come and be serviced here. And they would be pulled out of the water at night and then pushed back in, drug across here, and put in the water later. And also, believe it or not, we get very bad storms here in the winter. The lake looks very calm now, but believe me, in fall and in spring, we get some very, very serious storms. So to make sure the ships wouldn't be broken up on the rocks, they would be taken up, hauled up here, and put out of harm's way. So over on this side, we'll see that large vats were the catch, where the fish were thrown in, and then later to be taken to market. So I'm Jacob Firsel. I hope you enjoyed your tour of Magdala with me. God willing, we'll hope to see you soon here. Bye-bye.